Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the new Labour government from BIA. I've got with me today Steve Bates, the CEO of the BIA.
Hi, Martin. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you.
And myself, Associate Director of Policy, Public Affairs and Investor Relations. So we are, of course, here today to talk about the new government, which is still very much being formed in terms of ministers being appointed, responsibilities being handed out, but no shortage of announcements and certainly plenty of activity in the press, speeches being made that we'll unpick today so that you can feel reassured that you know everything that we know about this new government, which of course has a strong majority and a 5-year term. This is Keir Starmer, of course, our new Prime Minister, speaking on the steps of Downing Street, setting out his desires for how he wants to run the country, of a government that will serve the people, and is committed to growth and rebuilding trust in politics as well.
So yeah, thanks, Martin. I think we're keen to sort of give you a perspective on what does this mean for the life science sector. We can't do everything, but this is our best guess a week in on as to where things have got to. So thanks for joining us. And it was a big night, wasn't it, on last Thursday?
It was. How late did you stay up watching it all?
5 a.m. I made it all the way through to 5 a.m. So back on time.
I fell asleep.
Down, but
I think I fell asleep about 1:30 and woke up as the first results came in. So yes. It was an exciting night. Big result, obviously. Labour getting a very large majority, 34% of the vote share, as commentated on quite widely, a reasonably low vote share, but resulting in a large proportion of the seats in Parliament, 64%, and a majority of 172 seats.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, I mean, I think this shows you the sort of peculiarities of first past the post in the UK system. You can see that Reform got 14% of the vote, but 1% of the seats. Liberals, surprisingly, usually they do better in share than they do in seats, but their votes fell in the right place. So they've got broadly comparable number of seats, over 50 this year. But Labour, obviously, the big winner because they were first past the post in most of the seats and did particularly well. Big changes in Scotland, I think, were a big factor in this election. But we'll try and get into what the government's doing rather than the pure politics of it. But interesting to see where it's got to.
And of course, this means that Rishi Sunak, no longer our Prime Minister, has announced that he would resign as leader of the now opposition of the Conservative Party as soon as a process is put in place to find his replacement.
Yeah, interesting, Martin. Thank you for putting out, I think, what is the quote that's interesting for our sector from his leaving speech in Downing Street, that he believes that part of the legacy of the past government was to make the UK the home of the new generation of transformative technologies, which I think we would agree with. We hope that we've done a good job in life sciences, and certainly we have made the UK a third global cluster in life sciences.
Now, on the last webinar that we did on the 25th of June, where we were looking at the election and some of the candidates, we gave you this bingo card. I certainly used it on the night, staying up, although falling asleep before a lot of these were announced. But these were some of the potential champions for life sciences that we identified that might get elected on the 4th of July. There's some returning ministers and shadow ministers in the shape of George Freeman and Daniel Zeitner, Chionua, but some new faces as well, Pippa Heylings for South Cambridgeshire Lib Dems, for instance. And actually, of these potential life science champions, a lot of them did get into Parliament. So George has returned, Daniel, Chi have returned, and we've got some new potential life science champions such as Laura Sullivan, who is a researcher at the Crick Institute, the Francis Crick Institute, won her seat for Gravesham. And Pippa Heylings, as mentioned, not a life scientist by background, but she does have a lot of biotech companies in her constituency. So a lot of our members will have her as their new MP.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I think there's there's several hundred MPs who are new to Parliament. I think they're all finding their offices and all the rest of it at the moment. So it'll take us several months, I think, to find out who's really interested. But it's great to have at least a starting premise of some of the people who we know may have either constituency interest or personal interest in our area of work. And this is our starting attempt.
Yeah, it does take a while to dig through biographies and, of course, get to know the new MPs as well. It's not always evident their interests and not always easy to find their backgrounds either. So we're looking forward to reaching out to these MPs and others, of course, over the coming weeks to make contact with them. And, of course, looking forward to the party conferences and then Parliament Day later this year to meet them.
And one of the great things we find, Martin, is that sometimes members of our BIA network know the new MPs through professional contacts or through social contacts or through other things. If you think you're aware of any new members of Parliament who you may have been to school with, who knows, who we should be engaging on life sciences, please let us know. Keen to make this interactive. If you've got any questions, we'll also take some questions at the end. But any thoughts, comments, that would be really, really relevant. So this is our first few, but there may well be others.
Now, the results of the election was pretty well known. Everyone predicted a Labour majority, but there were some close calls actually. Jeremy Hunt and Wed Streeting actually coming close to being ousted from Parliament.
Yeah, if you look at this, I mean, this is incredible, really. That the sitting Chancellor of the Exchequer in one of the safest seats in the country, being run within a few hundred votes of losing. Jeremy Hunt spent most of his time in his constituency and spent a significant amount of his own money on this campaign, and you can see probably it was well worth it. And probably one that people have not clocked, so it hasn't been as much in the news, is how close the current Health Secretary Wes Streeting was to losing to an independent Gaza-inspired independent candidate in Ilford in East London. Really, again, a few hundred votes, and we know we predicate what we expect to happen, but you never know what happens on the night. And this goes to show that predictions about elections need to be taken very carefully, because actually the results on the night really do matter. And these were two that were, in a sense, too close to call for much of the night last Thursday.
There are also some big names that have left Parliament as a result of the election. John Ashworth was, I think, a surprise to you and many others, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, John Ashworth, the former Shadow Health Secretary in the COVID era, also a big wheel in the Labour campaign, standing in Leicester, again, lost to an independent, a bit similar to the Wes Streeting piece, but would definitely have been in the cabinet if he'd have won his seat. So that was a big surprise. And then if you look at this, if you're from outside the UK, to see that the former Prime Minister Liz Truss has lost her seat in a very safe part of the country, southwest Norfolk, very close to where George Freeman's seat is, that was a big shock. Penny Mordaunt, famous for carrying a sword in the coronation or for being a potential Conservative leadership candidate, again, another shock defeat. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, a leading light of the Brexit community, defeated in a very safe seat in North Somerset. All of these, I think, show the seismic change we're seeing in UK politics in the last week.
Yeah, and we could have put up a number of other very well-known faces for this slide as well. So that means that there's a significantly reduced official opposition in the Conservative Party. And looking at the makeup of it, it's quite interesting, this analysis that shows that the party is now quite significantly aligned to the centre or the centre-right of politics rather than the far right or the further right. Although there has been plenty of reports in the news of Suella Braverman and others certainly pushing the party towards a particular political angle that could benefit them if they are desired to be running for the leadership of the Conservatives. Currently, we've still got Rishi Sunak as the leader of Conservatives and opposing the Prime Minister across Parliament. Jeremy Hunt remains as Shadow Chancellor, and a number of other Shadow Chancellors or Shadow Ministers remain as well. Andrew Griffith has stepped up to be Shadow Science Secretary, following Michelle Donnellan, also being one of those big names that has left Parliament at the election. We've got a few faces here on the right that are potential leadership candidates. We don't know quite how the Conservatives will select their next leader. It could be a fairly quick election, or it could be a long process taking us to the autumn conferences or beyond.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Martin. I think this just goes to show how big a change we're seeing in the opposition. I was intrigued by this because this pie chart, which shows essentially the political leanings of the Parliamentary Conservative Party, might be at odds with some of the discourse that we're hearing about whether they'll do a deal with the further to the right Reform Party, the party of Nigel Farage. Actually, because they've lost so many parliamentarians, the rump that's left is actually probably more close to George Freeman than it is to some of the extreme right wing positions that Jacob Rees-Mogg or others would have articulated. So I suppose the question is whether the Conservative Parliamentary Party try and drag that party back into the centre during this election campaign, or whether they look to do a deal with Reform. And I think this is interesting because it shows that probably the weight of the Parliamentary Party, which may be distinct from the members in the country, are pulling to the centre. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes across the autumn and the summer and autumn.
Absolutely. So on to our new government and the new faces of the ministers that we will be talking to for the next 5 years, probably. Obviously, Rachel Reeves becoming the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer. She was the Shadow Chancellor, so absolutely no surprises. And I think in the appointments of any of the cabinet ministers, there's not really been any surprises in those who have got their role. Steve, do you want to take? I mean, there's quite a few familiar names here to the BIA and your past as well. Do you want to take us through a few of them?
Yeah, I mean, maybe start with your briefing of Darren Jones, Martin. What was he interested in the last time you met him?
Yeah, so Darren took an interest in our deep biotech work. So members will know that we have significantly expanded BIA's work beyond health biotech into the application of biotechnology to solve climate change and other challenges mankind faces. So Darren was, when we published our report earlier this year, Darren was very interested in that. So that's very good.
Yeah, and Spencer Livermore, Lord Livermore, and Emma Reynolds MP were both contemporaries of mine as special advisors in the previous Labour government. So it's good to see them. From my perspective, Emma has been a long advocate of being pro Europe, but spent some time away from Parliament when she lost a seat, and has fought back to get a seat back. And obviously, we knew her at a time when she worked at the City UK, when we worked with her on scale up finance initiatives, so she knows the work that we've been doing around that very well. And Spencer has been part of the economic scene in the Labour Party for a long time, a very level-headed chap. And I'll talk later about engagements I've had with Rachel. It's fantastic from our perspective that we see the continuity there, and she has been a core part behind the Prescription for Growth document that we'll talk about as well. So a good set of engaged people who have good understanding of the life sciences sector, and great to see them welcome them to their new roles.
Yes, and although the names of most of the ministers have been announced now, there are still some to be announced for some of the departments, but this looks like the full cohort for the Treasury. But the exact policy briefs of each have not necessarily been announced, so we're waiting to see who will be responsible for different elements of policy that the BIA takes a strong interest in. Darren as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, that's kind of the number 2 role that does oversee most of the activity of the Treasury and leads on things like the spending review, where government sets its spending priorities. So that's a key role that we know looks roughly like it did in the former government. But the other roles could be changed, and we're waiting to see, although Spencer Livermore has an overall responsibility for growth. So that is going to include investment, capital spending, potentially R&D tax credits and other tax incentives that are designed to encourage investment as well. Moving on to DSIT, we have Peter Kyle, who was Shadow Science Secretary, taking his role now as the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. And his speech that he has given so far and the press releases that he put out are very much focused on turning DSIT into a delivery department, very action orientated, and actually quite a big focus on digitalization of public services, but also a lot of talk about supporting the science and research communities and their role in boosting economic growth as well, and improving people's lives through science and technology. So I think that's great to see.
So I suppose there's a couple of surprises on this slide in a sense, Martin. Number one, is it a surprise that we're seeing the department continue? Remember, it's a relatively new department created by Rishi Sunak, so it could have gone in the change of government. So the fact that it continues to exist, which is what Keir Starmer said he was going to do, is interesting in itself. So the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology is now perhaps a more solid fixture in the Whitehall landscape than we had seen before. And sneaking in the bottom left-hand corner is Sir Patrick Vallance, well known to us as the former government's chief scientific advisor and a famous face from COVID era slide presentations and advising Boris Johnson during the height of the pandemic, the man behind the COVID vaccine task force and other initiatives at that time, has now agreed to join the government as a Labour minister in the Lords as the Minister of State for Minister for Science. So a big coup, an unusual appointment. Patrick does not have years as an MP, but he does have great experience as the government's chief scientific advisor, and before that, of course, working for GSK as well as a medical background. So Patrick brings great knowledge in our sector to the role and knows the BIA well, and has been a strong partner in the various roles that he has had. So I think that's from our perspective a great appointment. I think Peter, as you say, Martin, is again strongly engaged in growth sectors of the economy and really interested in new things. One thing that's interesting already is that some of the bits of the Cabinet Office which were interested in AI have gone into the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. So I think there will be an AI focus, and much of the talk that I've heard in policy circles is around how you use the innovations in technology to reform public services or make public sector a greater delivery department. So what could you do in terms of being able to get your benefits more easily on your mobile phone? How do you get rid of some of that red tape and think about new ways in which you can deliver public services, I think is a big part of the mission. And of course, we know Baroness Jones, again, Martin, we've met her recently as the BIA.
Yeah. She also took an interest in our deep biotech work as well, and took a meeting, very keen to understand that. So good to see her take up that role. She's also Chief Whip in the Lords as well, for the Labour Party. Ferriol Clark, not well known to the BIA, but does have a degree in bioinformatics, so understands the importance of data and no doubt AI also to drug discovery and development. And Chris Bryant, quite publicly recovering from cancer as well, so again understands the importance of our sector. Their roles haven't been nailed down yet in terms of what they'll be looking after. I think it's quite interesting that Patrick is Minister of State for Science, not Science, Innovation and Technology like his predecessor. Whether that means that responsibility would be shared with others, we'll have to wait and see. Or I do think Peter Carr will probably be likely to be taking a stronger role in overall R&D policy as well.
Yeah, and I think one name you might have expected to see on this slide is Chi Onwira. We're not aware that Chi has got a post in the government, despite being a shadow minister for many years in science, a shadow really for almost a decade, but not aware that she's been appointed to a role in the current administration. We're keeping our eyes out if she ends up in a different berth.
Yeah, there are some departments that haven't filled up their full roster of ministers yet, so we'll wait and see. In health, Wes Streeting, again, getting the role we expected him to. he has, I think a lot of the activity of the government, the announcements and interviews on radio and on the TV have involved the NHS as a major priority for this government. But he's also been talking about how Britain can be a powerhouse for life sciences and the importance of NHS and life sciences contributing to the economy of the UK as well. And he was at the Tony Blair Institute conference yesterday speaking about that, where you saw him, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about where's his close shave in terms of his parliamentary seat, but now he's up and running as the health secretary. He's been vocal about the need for change, described the NHS as broken, and is very, very strong about making the Department of Health an economic department, a powerhouse for economic growth, lining up behind the Chancellor and the Prime Minister's drive for growth. So I think that's very good for us. And you can see he's already talking about how you combine the care of the NHS with the genius of our country's leading scientific minds, we can get good treatments in and help get Britain's economy booming. So he does see it this way round, which I think is really useful. He works very closely with Peter Kyle. They, in fact, shared an office in opposition, so they literally were across the, across a corridor from each other. So again, I think there's a good alignment with the incoming government, and it's great to see Wes championing this. How that affects itself in policy, I don't think we've seen yet. Obviously, he's had to deal with striking doctors in the first week and getting out and meeting the NHS, but it's interesting that he has made it a very strong pledge about making the department a department for economic growth.
Yeah, and there is, of course, a key part of government that's not a department in itself, but spans the science department and the health department, and that's the Office for Life Sciences. Labour talked about boosting it, giving it more presence in government, and we're waiting to see what form that takes. But from the conversations I've had with colleagues in government so far, Wes and Peter are definitely both taking a strong interest in that shared directorate and taking joint briefings from it as well, which is good to see that kind of joint working continuing as well. These other ministers, their roles haven't been published yet, exactly what they'll be looking at. But again, some familiar faces from the shadow team there in Karen Smith and Stephen Kinnock. Business and trade, again, Jonathan Reynolds moving across into government to keep his role as business secretary. Again, his focus in press releases and commentary is, again, echoing what Rachel Reeves and everyone has said in terms of government working in partnership with business. So that's very welcome. And then we've got quite a large roster of ministers in this department, including sharing Baroness Jones with the Department for Science. But none of these roles have been clarified in terms of what they'll be looking after. And
again, another one from my era, Douglas Alexander, reappearing as an MP in Scotland, lost his seat some time ago, but was an advisor back to and a minister, in fact, under Gordon Brown. Again, somebody that it's good to see back a figure who's got ministerial experience from long time ago, as have Gareth Thomas, I think, and Maggie Jones. Again, a good roster of people where we can build some strong relationships, and we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah. And then DEFRA, a key department for particularly the deep biotech element of BIA's work. And here we've got your constituency local MP, Steve Reed.
Steve Reed, Streatham and North Croydon, that excellently rural part of South London. But no, Steve's a former leader of Lambeth Council, and has held this brief in the shadow for a while. So again, I think well engaged in this area, along with Daniel. Actually, I think you've given him a particularly small photo there, or maybe it's an arty shot. Maybe you thought he was going to Department for Culture, Media and Sport, but again, Daniel's the MP for Cambridge, has always taken a strong interest in life sciences. So I think again here, another team where we can, as we need, engage at some depth.
Yeah, absolutely. He was chair of the APPG for Life Sciences, which is the group that BIA ran in Parliament, a cross-party group of MPs and peers who held events on life sciences in Parliament. He won't be able to be chair of that anymore when we reform that group. But yes, he, like you say, has been a great champion of the sector, and we're looking forward to working with him in his new role in DEFRA. And then Steve, why have we got foreign on here?
Well, not only to share the fact that David Lammy is the new Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs, but also I was intrigued in his early speeches. He's zipped off around Europe, met the Germans, met the Poles, various others. He's talking about doing two things. Johnny Reynolds has talked about the importance of getting a trade deal right with Europe and listening to business about what might be in that. But David Lammy's talked about perhaps a softer or a broader cooperation with European partners in his early weeks, and I was struck by this phraseology from one of his first speeches. Post-pandemic, we're very aware of our capability in health, pharmaceuticals, and in higher education. So there, I think we are talking about things that Europe wants to talk to us about. I think David may have a broader sense of soft security, in which he thinks that there may be an agenda to be set, and it's interesting that he sees our world, life sciences, probably because of the post-pandemic capabilities, as being something that could be talked to in that capacity. So I'm thinking about whether there are opportunities for our sector, not simply in the nuts and bolts of any potential trade deal, but also in perhaps a more broad security approach to Europe, about supply, or about pandemics, about AMR or other things. So it's interesting the Foreign Office may be in this discussion as well.
Right, we covered this in our last webinar, but just wanting to remind our members of the quite extensive science policy platform that Labour set out ahead of the general election in their document, A Prescription for Growth, the document that we helped launch with Wes and Peter. And then obviously other elements from their manifesto that talked about securenomics, this idea that government needed to give security and consistency for businesses to invest, and part of that will involve a business tax roadmap. As I mentioned earlier, strengthening the Office for Life Sciences, and also implementing or creating a new plan for life sciences. We've had the Vision for Life Sciences published in 2021, and we expect that to be looked at again as promised in the manifesto. We've already talked about the partnership with industry. That's been a clear theme running through a lot of the Labour Party's rhetoric. We're yet to see this Regulatory Innovation Office, any announcements on that, but that was proposed by Labour as something to ensure that regulators across government were joined up and also supporting innovation. And then finally, introducing NHS innovation and adoption strategy. We've already started to see some of that coming from Wes.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say on this, Martin, is there's been a sort of no surprises approach from Labour, and even, if you like, the big announcements that we saw in the first day from Rachel Reeves about speeding up planning, something that was well trailed and part of the election campaign. There's not been a sort of Bank of England independence moment, as we saw from Tony Blair and Gordon Brown on the first day of an incoming Labour government, nor is there a U-turn on much of this stuff. So I think we're seeing in the early days the playing of chips that we expected, and therefore I think it's fair to think that this is a reasonable expectation as to what we might see in the coming weeks and months. You never know exactly what's going to happen, but it feels as if these are still remain useful documents and give a good indication of current thinking and where people are going.
Right. We've got questions coming in, so please do use the Q&A chat to put in your questions. We'll come to those in a second, but we'll move on to a bit of a, not sure it's been a big surprise like the Bank of England independence that we got from the Blair government, but this is something quite significant for our sector. We knew it was in the manifesto that Labour wanted to create this national wealth fund. I suppose the small surprise is that as part of the creation of this, they are looking to subsume the British Business Bank into this new wealth fund, which will have statutory footing as well. So legislation will be required. The British Business Bank has, of course, become quite a significant player in life sciences funding because of the British patient capital and the £2.5 billion that it has to support equity investment into life sciences and deep tech. So waiting to see exactly what that means, but it was certainly announced yesterday. It was a very interesting news story coming out of government early on.
Yeah, and I see there was a question about what is the industrial strategy. I don't think we yet know what the industrial strategy is. I mean, in a sense, what Johnny Reynolds was saying yesterday was that they plan to deliver a new mission-driven industrial strategy. They want to support small businesses. They want to reset trade relations and champion British exports, particularly focusing on improving the EU relationship. And they want to make work pay by making sure that workers have got a decent wage and security of employment. So, I mean, that's sort of his top priorities. I don't think we've yet seen that boiled down into things that are sectorally led, although the idea was that there would be a sectoral approach. I think that they will probably establish an industrial strategy council, which will look to support that. And we'll see where that goes to. I expect there'll be more on this in the coming weeks and months, but we can see direction of travel, and there's a reasonable post on LinkedIn from Johnny Reynolds if you want some more detail.
Yeah. One thing that we perhaps might have expected to see was something around the Mansion House Compact. So it's 1 year today that the Mansion House Compact, where 9 pension funds committed to investing 5% of their assets into private companies, including life sciences. There's been progress on that agenda over the past year, but we were potentially expecting to see something come out today that hasn't been. But Steve, I think Rachel has mentioned it in some of her speeches.
Yeah, the Chancellor reconfirmed on Monday that thinking about how you get pension fund investment into productive parts of the UK economy remains on the agenda, and we've seen more detail of that in opposition from the Labour team. I think it was sort of hidden under the planning announcement, the making it easier to get through planning on Monday, and obviously the National Wealth Fund is the headline from yesterday. But I think that agenda has not disappeared. I think that there is still a desire to do it. It will be interesting to see how it interacts with this wealth fund structure. But I think that's going to continue to be there, and we're going to continue to need to impress the need for growth of UK life sciences, and also the importance on that for security for pensioners in retirement, and also that it can't just all go to infrastructure. It does need to go to parts of the sector, parts of the economy that do have the potential to grow, even if there is a degree of risk in some of the things that we do.
Hmm. So the BIA is obviously engaging with new ministers and new parliamentarians. We are engaging across the whole policy landscape that the BIA cares about, from fundamental science within universities right through to the NHS. And with each minister, we will be contacting them separately and tailoring our conversation according to their policy brief once those have been announced. But to give you a flavour of what's kind of at the top of our agenda for the top of government, and all governments do have a kind of 100-day policy platform that they want to achieve certain things during that time, and this is our desire for that. So, as already mentioned, the Mansion House Compact, the pension fund reforms agenda, getting those getting that work to continue, because we have made so much progress over the years on that key agenda. So we want to make sure that continues, and in fact continues at pace and scale, in greater pace and scale. Second, that business tax roadmap that we mentioned earlier that the Labour have said that they will do. They said they'd spend 6 months doing it. We obviously want to prioritise R&D tax credits within that, and we saw, as we explained in the last webinar, a lot of changes to that over the years, partly coming from a lack of evidence and understanding within Treasury about how R&D tax credits benefit our sector. So we want to see a review of how R&D tax credits do interact with our sector as part of that business tax roadmap. And then finally, we have a life sciences vision from the previous government. We have a sector plan published by Labour whilst they're in opposition in February. And now that they're in government, we do need to see movement, not not too quickly. I think we need to take time. The government needs to take time. This needs to be a cross-government activity as well, not just held in one department. Needs buy-in from all stakeholders. But we do want to see action on developing a new life sciences strategy.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Make it 3 quick points, because that's all I can remember if I'm standing in a lift with somebody.
And were you in a lift with anyone recently, Steve?
No, not in a lift, but I did have the opportunity to go and listen to Rachel Reeves's speech to business leaders on Monday morning, and then got the chance to meet the Chancellor in these impressive surroundings in the Treasury. It was also fantastic to meet Peter Kyle here on the left-hand side, and Patrick Vallance with John Simmons, the man with grey hair in the middle, who's chair of GSK, and the Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner at the reception thereafter. So we've been able to make some of these points early doors, and it was a great opportunity to both celebrate the fact that we had Europe's largest Series A raise for a UK life science company announced on Monday, over £90 million for Mike's, which was fantastic. So able to share the success there, and talk about the importance of the life science sector to the growth plan. And it was good to reconnect. They all looked pretty frazzled after and excited to be getting going in government. But as you say, it's early days, and I think people are still doing a lot of organisation. But it was good to see that the plan that they'd had in opposition was up and running. There'd been good engagement, I think, with the senior civil servants, and they were pleased to have made a couple of announcements and put economic growth at the heart of the first week of the new government. And it was nice to be able to celebrate the fact that UK Life Sciences was contributing to that within hours of the new government forming. So,
what does the rest of the year look like? I'm sure it's going to be very busy. We now have a King's speech to look forward to in 7 days' time. This is when government will set out its legislative agenda for the next period of time in Parliament. NHS reform likely to be there, planning rules potentially, some of that legislation to set up maybe the Industrial Strategy Council and the Growth Fund as well. Summer recess, when the MPs either go on holiday or return to their constituency to work there, has now been announced for the 30th of July. Obviously a bit later than usual, given the election being called quite late as well, close to summer recess anyway. And then when they return in September, we'll be into the party conferences, Labour up in Liverpool, the Conservatives in Birmingham, Lib Dems down in Brighton. BIA will be up to all of those. You've got the first 100 days. As I said, this is always a focus for new governments. That's on the 14th of October. Although I do understand there's no strict definition of how you count the 100 days. So you could just say business working days, but that would be if you counted just every individual day. We don't yet know if there'll be an autumn budget or some form of fiscal event where the new Chancellor will set out perhaps changes to government spending and taxes as well. She did say during the election campaign that they would just have one fiscal event a year rather than two, but exactly when that will be and whether it will be linked to a wider comprehensive spending review is yet to be seen. We have our Parliament Day on the 14th of November. We're looking forward to that as the time when we bring our members into Parliament. And then after what I'm sure will be a very exhausting autumn, we'll go into the Christmas break and see what, I'm sure at that point, look back at the year, quite a momentous year. Right, there's lots of Q&A, which is fantastic. Please do share your views and priorities for the new government, and we can use the Q&A or the chat function for that. We're keen to hear what members think. Perhaps you've engaged with some of the candidates during the election campaign, or perhaps you know some of the MPs who are successful in winning as well. So keen to hear your views and experiences on that. And what you would like to see from the government. Steve, shall we go into some
no, thank you. I've been looking at them as they've been coming in, and there's some really good questions here. So I'll have a go at speculating on some of these. On David Lammy's intentions for closer cooperation with the EU, how do you think this will impact Windsor Framework and the supply of medicines to and from the UK and Northern Ireland? So I think that it will be interesting to see whether the supply of essential medicines discussion goes into this broader security discussion, which David Lammy seems to be keen to do, as opposed to the more formal trade discussion. So I think there may be two tracks in which these things could be discussed. Obviously, that's where I think it will be interesting. I don't think anybody will want to re-enter formal negotiations very fast and understanding the political complexities of Northern Ireland. Hilary Benn, the incoming Northern Ireland Secretary, knows this brief well, and I've had the chance to talk him through medicines regulation. And of course, Peter Cowell, of the DCIT Secretary, used to shadow the Northern Ireland brief as well. So again, understands the complexities of medicines regulation in Northern Ireland and asked questions on that when he was in opposition. So we've got a ministerial team who are alive to the niceties of both the complexity of the political challenge and the complexity of the trade challenge. I don't think anybody's got into it, but perhaps there's a softer way to do it through a discussion around mutual security in the David Lammy process, and undoubtedly it will come up in the harder discussions. But I've not seen any mention yet of this in detail in terms of Windsor Framework. So that's as far as I can go there. The question on industrial strategy: are they focusing on driving growth in key sectors? Do you want to have a crack at that one, Martin?
Yes, so certainly in the manifesto and in speeches, they have highlighted particular sectors. Some modern innovative sectors, certainly like life sciences and AI, have been mentioned quite extensively, and but also steel and some more traditional industries that are certainly modernizing and in need of support in modernizing, and of course very important in some of the industrial heartlands where Labour have a heritage. So I think there will be some sector focuses and some new strategies coming out, although we would expect probably for that to happen after the Industrial Strategy Council is formed. The Industrial Strategy Council itself is expected to have business, the representatives from the union movement, and also academics on it, as well as government officials. So we'll wait to see how that forms, and also how the Life Sciences Council, which is the government industry forum for our sector, how that fits into that as well. So we're going to have to wait to see how that comes out.
Yeah, and I think that links into Peter's questions. Are there any Tory initiatives or policies that the BIA supported that may not go ahead? I think, surprisingly, during this campaign, we didn't see a large division on life sciences policies in this area. I suppose the commitment that the Labour government made to changing the tax treatment for carried interest for private equity is probably one that will be baked into Treasury legislation at the time of a new budget, and that probably was something that certain investors in life sciences were keen on from a continued Tory conservative position. So that might be one. And I think the other thing is, it's too early to say. I'm sure we will see changes and evolutions. I hope we can nudge them in the direction of things that will be supportive for the sector. But I can't think of an obvious one yet that we're seeing that's been immediately dismantled or gone in another direction. Undoubtedly, we will see change as we go forward. But I think it was a remarkable area of consensus in some respects, typified by the fact that Patrick Vallance has become the new minister. Mansion House reforms. We've got a question here. Lifts, spices, will they continue? Do you want to have an answer? Go at that one.
Yes, I mean, certainly lifts. The money was essentially allocated at the spring budget. This is government money that will be used by a venture capital firm and a pension fund to co-invest into life sciences, and it was won by Intermediate Capital Group and Phoenix as a pension fund. So although the final deal and shape of that hasn't actually been confirmed, I would be incredibly surprised if Labour turned around and pulled the rug out from under that. Equally, I think Pisces, which is this new trading venue that the London Stock Exchange is seeking to set up that will allow private companies to trade shares without being listed on a stock exchange. No promises, because Treasury, I think, consulted on that before the general election and didn't actually publish their conclusion. The BIA did submit some views to that consultation. So again, I'd be surprised if it didn't go forward, but there is a chance, I think, certainly. And as mentioned earlier, the Mansion House reforms, or the 1 year on as well, gone a little bit quiet today, but it's not just a purely government driven initiative. The City of London Corporation are behind it being an idea of the former Lord Mayor of London. So there's a big head of steam behind it that I think will keep on pushing forward. And as we said, our top priority to government is to continue pushing on that.
Yeah, and I think, Martin, the way that I'm thinking of this is, you can see that the new government have framed the entire next parliament as a period where they're going to focus on growth. And if the question is, does this help boost growth, and does it not cost us any more money than we're already spending? If the answer to both of those two things are yes, then I think it's unlikely that we're going to see significant changes of direction to stop that. And if you think about it, Mansion House reform doesn't cost the government much in terms of the PSBR. And has a good chance of delivering accelerated growth. So I think you can see getting rid of planning restrictions, getting Britain building, supporting sectors that can make growth happen, changing processes in government to modernise them, to make them supportive of business. All of that is what's being talked about. Whether all of it can be delivered, who knows? But I think the things that are here fit within that growth agenda, which I think is being strongly supported.
Do you think Labour, we've got a question here from Joe Wright, do you think Labour will talk more about pandemic preparedness? What does the new government mean for the biological security strategy? I mean, Patrick Vallance's appointment is a fairly significant one in answering this question, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to Patrick the other day, and what was interesting was, I mean, Patrick, in a sense, was the architect of the 100 days plan for pandemic preparedness that went to the G7 when Boris was the Prime Minister, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. He remains passionate about driving that into the UK government and reviving that. So I think the thinking around pandemic preparedness that will be in this government's thinking in the person of Patrick. I don't know whether, and I think you can see the focus on securonomics from Rachel Reeves also means that they'll be thinking about this in terms of those things, and that David Lammy agenda, the David Lammy speech in his time in the Foreign Office, already talking about a broader sense of security arrangements, not purely defence or NATO, but is there a European identity that can be forged there as another place where this could imagine itself. So I don't think this agenda will be lost. I think, it's not up there with growth in the sense many people are trying to distance themselves from the COVID past, but I think that there is, particularly in the person of Patrick, a desire to make sure this is done properly, but it probably hasn't got the profile that it had 4 years ago.
Yeah. And a bit of crystal ball gazing is required here from John and an anonymous contributor as well, which I might merge together. What do you think will be the first major policy from the Labour government that will impact life sciences, and will we see a return to the early days of OLS under Paul Drayson? I'm sure you remember them very well, Steve, that seemed to radically accelerate the speed of policymaking. As I said, we've not seen much on OLS and its structure yet. I'm not sure if it was going to be one of the first major policy announcements for life sciences. What do you think, Steve?
I don't know is the honest answer. I mean, I suppose in a sense the transition to a stable government that looks like it's got a decent run at 4 or 5 years might be the first thing that markets have reacted to. People have got a good idea as to what we've got, what the prospects are ahead. A broad centre-left government that's got a workable majority for 4 years and isn't intent on on an ideological position that damages Britain's trading relationship with its closest neighbour is probably a pretty big fundamental shift. That will probably provide, people talk about, Britain going back to being sensible in a time when not all nations around the world are sensible, may have an impact in life science investment. And I hope that the appointment of Patrick Vallance also enables people to see that there's a degree of grown-ups in the room, sensible policy making, and there's not been any sort of immediate spasm of left-wing radicalism or anything like that. So hopefully stability and sensibleness is the first thing that's supportive and helpful. Second is the fact that that we remain a high priority and core to the growth agenda, which I think is also important. We'll wait and see as to whether there's further formal announcements, but I would hope that a growth budget would be an important moment for us in the autumn.
Yeah. We've got a question about the Department for Education and Skills, which we didn't highlight as a key ministerial department. It is, of course, one that BIA does engage with, and perhaps just trying to keep the length of this webinar shorter wasn't in there. But we will be publishing a guide to government in the coming weeks, which will list out all of these departments, their policy priorities, and their secretaries of state and ministers. But I think the person asking this question makes a good point about the importance of housing near life science hubs. And we held an event recently in Cambridge, a roundtable with the previous government, talking about many of the challenges that companies face there are not necessarily to do with science, they're to do with their staff and their housing and their transport needs as well. So it is really important. Angela Rayner, another person that we haven't particularly spoken about today, is Deputy Prime Minister, but also Secretary of State for Housing and Local Government. And I know that department is taking an interest in life sciences, in planning reforms that might be required to support the construction of labs. But also that department does oversee the Cambridge, I forget the name of the strategy, but the strategy that is looking at how to expand Cambridge as an innovation and tech hub, including housing and water supply and transport and all that. So it's very much on the governance agenda, and one that the BIA is engaging with.
Yeah, I think it's one where we support, because I think we're in line with many other parts of the community, of the business community, in a general ask that we need both rapid infrastructure support and the space in which we can grow skills. Kate Barclay from BIA is already engaged with new ministers in the Department for Education and Skills. Apologies, we should have put that slide in. Again, it's been a busy week, but yeah, both of those fit as core parts of our agenda. The reason we've not highlighted them is in the sense that they're not sector specific, rather than that we don't support them. But yeah, we definitely support those unlocking the needs to enable people to grow businesses, and that is the infrastructure around them. We could equally have put in Home Office and visas and the need for that to speed up as well. But they're probably not the ones that we would have where we'd be the only voice or one of a few voices making the case.
We've got lots of questions. We are running out of time. Are there any, Steve, that you are have caught your eye?
Well, I agree with Richard that we know that we're in increasingly fierce and competitive global markets in life sciences. I think we need to absolutely make sure that we don't rest on our laurels, that we need to go faster. Hopefully we can do that. We can show that there's both speeding up of our ability to grow companies, deliver benefits, and absolutely, I think that's the right analysis. I don't see any big changes for pharma biotech with the new government. I mean, you can see we're looking for some change, but I don't think that there's a black-white on-off switch with the new government as it's come in. Will there be a choice between the UK and between Europe and US? Well, we've declined as a share of US trade under the present government. If you look at the DBT, Department of Business and Trade data, in part because I hope we can do both. I hope we can improve our trade with the US because we've got fantastic products and services, but also increase or decrease the barriers to those in the EU which have been imposed. Hopefully we can do both, yeah, I mean that will be good relations. Obviously, we didn't get a trade deal done with the US in the last Parliament. It will be interesting to see whether the US is in the mood for a trade deal, and perhaps it's the allies and securonomics shelter that will be the important part of being able to improve that. So I think we'll have to wait and see on those ones.
Yeah, and I'm going to use Peter Farmer's question about how can we personally and professionally lobby the government on life sciences strategy to segue to the end of the webinar. Of course, being a BIA member is the best way that you can engage with the government. Coming to our events, learning about what the government is doing, our Life Science Regulatory Conference, Future of Regulatory Conference in the autumn is a key one there, working with the MHRA to look at the landscape. TechBio also going to be a big one for policy, and then Bioprocess UK in the autumn also, lots of policy discussion there. Of course, being a BIA member, you can be involved in our committees and you can come to Parliament Day and other activities where we do represent our sector. And if you are running a company in a constituency, why not? Or indeed, if you're a scientist of some other sort in a constituency, why not contact your MP, build a relationship with them as well? Personally, I think that's always very important for MPs to understand all the great activity, science, research and innovation happening in their constituencies. We have the BIA Summer Party tomorrow. There may be 1 or 2 tickets left, I'm not quite sure, but they were certainly very close to running out last time I spoke to the events team. And do join us for the Women in Biotech event in Manchester on the 18th of September after summer as well. So with that, if you're not a BIA member, please do join. Go to our website where you can fill in a form and be contacted by our membership team to sign up. And with that, thank you for joining us today. It's been a great hour discussing the new government, and we do keep a lookout for our guide to government, which will be published on our website in the coming weeks as well.
Thanks all. Thanks for your engagement. Look forward to your support and help as we tackle this new era together. Thanks all, and thanks Martin. Excellent presentation.
Thanks, Steve.